Allahu Akbar.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah. Thank you so much. Brothers and sisters, I want to first thank you, before getting into the assigned topic that I have, thank you for actually coming to this convention. Coming to this icna convention in the city of Baltimore. Coming at a time when this nation is so conflicted in its identity, that this nation falls nowhere near being short in the ideals of everyone coming together in this land of America. But as recent events in Baltimore have pointed out, and all across the nation, there are so many who are outside of this freedom and outside of the benefits of living in a country like this. And so it's very appropriate that you and I take the time from our busy schedules to pause in the midst of all of these varying social conflicts, and pause and reflect on the sunnah and the sirah of the Khatam Nabi'een, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That it's very important that we don't try to just turn to our sociologists, turn to our anthropologists, but we turn to the best divinely perfected example in the form of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that there we can glean answers to so many of the pressing issues and questions that we are confronted with today. I have the task of talking to you briefly about raising children, but I want to address a very specific dimension of our raising children in the context of here in the United States. It goes without saying that raising children as Muslims in America is an awesome task. It presents many challenges. Many of these challenges are made worse because of the media-driven images and stereotypes that you and I and our children find every time they turn on any dimension of the media. Any media platform delivers into our homes and delivers to our children and delivers to us images and stereotypes that make it much more difficult for you and I to shape and to mold the minds of these pliable young people. It makes it much more challenging. And so this awesome responsibility, I want to just go through just a few of the commonly known and accepted values and qualities that you and I as parents and grandparents have in trying to raise Muslim children, to try to raise a generation of believers. It goes without saying that one of our first responsibilities is that of instilling this love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to put into the heart of our young people, to instill this kalama shahada, to instill the idea of la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. It goes without saying that the love of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his life and his sunnah, is such an inseparable part of the perfect development of the human spirit of Muslim lives, of young people and old. And so while instilling not just the knowledge of who the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is, but instilling a love of the Messenger of Allah is equally or just as important. You and I know that this love of the book of Allah, the Quran, is something that in just very general terms that we must also instill in our children. the morals and values that come from the Quran, from the Islamic civilization, from the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, are also very essential and key in developing this Islamic personality that we would want to have move forward into the future in this country. And just mentioning just a couple of other things that you know as parents, as guardians, that we have the responsibility to try to ensure and guarantee to the best of our ability to have a safe environment by which our children can grow, by which they can learn. And then finally, I will say in this portion that we have this responsibility to try to equip our young people academically and intellectually to meet the challenges that they will be faced in this environment as young Muslims. But I want to emphasize as well that in doing all of these things, we have to remember this maxim that children learn what they live. So no matter how much we try to teach our children that this ummah is a single ummah, when they hear you and I talking on the telephone, talking bad about a brother or a sister, thinking that you're not paying attention, we may think that our children are not listening to us on the telephone. They're not listening to the parents when they're with earshot. And so the responsibility of living what we want our children to learn in every aspect, in every dimension, cannot be overemphasized. Brothers and sisters, what I want to emphasize in these last few moments is that in this environment, in this cauldron almost of the United States, where we have the largest representation of the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ than any other single country on earth. Now think about this just for a moment. There is no country, majority country of Muslims. There are no countries with significant populations of Muslims that you can't find right here in the United States, that when we turn the pages of the newspaper, when we cut on the television, every single day we find that in this nation there's some issue about race, there's some issue about prejudice, there's some issue about class that dominates the media. And so now we're challenged to raise children in an environment that makes such stark distinctions between the color of the skins of individuals. Brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it so clear in the Quran, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has emphasized on so many different ways, and I'll try to share some of this with you in this presentation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya ayyuhal nas, Allah addressing mankind, not just Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds mankind that He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has created us from this single pair, that we all come from the same family. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it clear that there's only a distinction in His eyes, not because of the color of our skin, what tribe we come from, what nation we hail from, but only in our taqwa, our fear, our God consciousness. This is something that you and I as human beings cannot determine. This person has taqwa, that person has taqwa. It's something that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can determine. What we are responsible for doing is to follow to the best of our ability what is in this Quran, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to do, to stay away from, and what we find in the Sunnah and the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brothers and sisters, Islam, if it is anything, the Sunnah and the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if it's anything, it's a kind of manifesto of universal brotherhood of all human beings. In the United States, a country so dominated with racial discrimination, institutional and structural racism, a country that's so dominated, you and I have to ward against and fight against these tendencies to adopt these racial stereotypes, these racial attitudes, and then by adopting it ourselves, we can't but help instill these same attitudes in our children. Brothers and sisters, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has spoken about these attitudes and how detrimental it is to the development of the Islamic personality. Let me just share just a few things with you as how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ addressed this issue for this ummah. Brothers and sisters, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in an authentic tradition, said that let people stop boasting about their ancestors. And in this instance, he's talking about the believers. Let you believers quit boasting about your lineage, where you came from, who your people are. Because the Prophet Muhammad goes on to say that a human being, one is either a pious believer, either you're muttaqi, either you are a pious believer, or you are fasiq. You're a miserable sinner. So don't call up your lineage and think that because of who we come from, who our tribe may be, what our race or nationality may be, that it's any distinction, it's any elevation in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said, you're one or two things talking about us. We're either muttaqi, you are a pious believer, or you are a miserable sinner, nothing else. So take pride in the fact of your nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't call forth this lineage, this race, this tribe, this nationality, because it's not going to benefit you. Let me share a story from the page of Islamic movement under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In the established state of Medina, there was a man that's reported in tradition that came to Masjid al-Nabi. And as he came into Masjid al-Nabi, he saw the Sahaba sitting in a circle discussing Islam, talking about this deen. And he looked and he saw, and this was a non-Muslim, and he looked and he saw this Persian by the name of Salman. And you know the story of Salman al-Farsi. You know his sacrifice to get Islam, the struggles that he went to. And Salman al-Farsi was identifiably, because of his physical features, he was obviously not an Arab. And then the man looked around in the circle and he saw Suhaib al-Rumi. He saw this very fair complexioned Suhaib, the Roman. And then he looked around the room a little more and he saw in the circle Bilal ibn Rabah, the very dark-skinned Abyssinian from modern-day Ethiopia. And so the man looked at this circle studying in the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he said that what I need to do, I have a question. Now I can see here in Medina the Aus and the Khazraj supporting this man Muhammad ﷺ. I can understand that because they are tribes of Medina. But he said that my question is, what are these people doing here? Referring to Salman, referring to Suhaib, referring to Bilal ibn Rabah. Now, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as this narration goes on, was not present in the mosque, but one of the Sahaba found the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and said that this man has come into your masjid, and this is the question that he's asking. The story reports and related that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ immediately got angry, and he jumped up immediately, and he went from where he was and went to the masjid, and he said, "Call the adhan right now. Call the people to this masjid. I know it's not time for salah. Call the adhan. I want them here right now." As the believers gathered in the mosque, they heard the adhan, they responded to the call. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in response that, "O people, know that Allah, the Lord, is the Lord and sustainer, and He is one. Your ancestor is one. Your faith is one. The Arabism of any one of you is not from your mother or father. It is no more than a tongue. It's a language. Whoever speaks Arabic is an Arab." That the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was cutting through this asabiyah, this idea of nationalism, that I put so much pride in the fact that I'm from this particular Arab tribe, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ cut through all of that. He said, it doesn't matter where you come from. Don't start getting close to someone because of their language. If they're speaking Arabic, consider them an Arab. Brothers and sisters, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made it very clear. We have a narration that a brother came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and explained that I love fine clothes. I love beautiful clothes and nice fine shoes. Is this asabiyah? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ responded by saying, no, that's not asabiyah. That's not exalting yourself because you like fine clothes, that this nationalism, that this tribalism that has infected the social fabric of this land for so many centuries, is when you feel that what you have that is superior everybody else in this area as a person, or in clothes or shoes or horses, or just in their person itself, is inferior. It's to put others down. It's okay, as the Prophet Muhammad was saying, to love your people as his sunnah. So clearly, he loved Mecca. He longed for Mecca. He loved Medina. He loved his family, but he did not, as so many of us oftentimes have found ourselves guilty of, loving our family and loving our racial or tribal group, and thinking that somehow that we are superior, and we put other people down at the expense of a commonality, of unity of this ummah. We pass these attitudes on to our children. Why? Because children learn what they live. It's not what you and I preach to them. It's how they see you living when they hear you, when they see that my ummi, my abu have no friends outside of our own family and tribe or our race. That my mother and my father, I've never heard them say anything but negative ideas and thoughts about others outside of my race and my tribe. It doesn't matter what you and I come behind them saying after that. They are learning what they are living if we create an environment for our children to grow up in this country, where they find themselves in these contradictory, almost schizophrenic relationships with other people of this land, then we are depriving ourselves and depriving the next generation of leadership in this country of the pristine purity of Islam, that through the example of the Prophet Muhammad so smashed these kind of artificial attitudes about the importance of one group over another. You and I know that the Prophet Muhammad during his last sermon made it very clear to the over 120,000 people gathered in the plain of Arafat that the Prophet Muhammad made it so clear, again repeating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, making it so clear that there's no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, of a black over a white over a black, and the same thing with Arab and non-Arab, that there's no superiority of people, only in our taqwa, only in our fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So brothers and sisters, unless and until you and I do more than just intellectually appreciate this concept, unless and until you and I actualize this in our minds, in our hearts, in our treatment, in our attitudes, in the way that we interact with other Muslims who don't look or come from where we come from, unless and until you and I get to the standard of that righteousness and value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only comes from those who are the most God-fearing, the ones who are the most pious, unless and until you and I get to this level of understanding and practice. The light, the nur of Islam in this particular area will be forever dimmed. That we will be in a nation that has grappled and struggled with this issue of race and racism for so many centuries now. Not so many, because this nation is still a relatively young country, but you and I know that we have not reached our full potential socially and religiously and across the board. Why? And I say it's because of this elephant that's in the room called race. And you and I, as Muslims, we have the solution in the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We have it in his seerah. Learn this sunnah, learn this seerah. And for the purpose of this discussion in this particular area, let me just end on one final example from the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You and I know that all of the descriptions of Bilal ibn Rabah that come through from the seerah literature is that he was a very dark complexioned individual from Abyssinia. And we know that Bilal ibn Rabah, radiallahu anhu, was a very beloved Sahaba of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And when we look into the history of this period, we find that Bilal ibn Rabah had a brother. I think his name was Abdul Rahman. And everyone knew how precious, how close, how much love there was for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had for Bilal. And so Bilal's status was enhanced because people knew that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ loved him so much. Bilal's brother wanted to marry an Arab sister, a sister from an influential tribe, and he went and he proposed to the father. And they did everything in that household but to run him out of the house. Get off my step. Get away from here. What do you mean coming asking for my daughter's hand in marriage. So Bilal's brother went to Bilal and said to Bilal, "Oh, Bilal, you're my brother. If you come with me, maybe they will give me their daughter for marriage. All they need is to see you, Bilal." So Bilal, I'm sure, and this is just editorial comment, probably commented, "Well, I don't know if that's a good idea, but I'll go with you since you asked me." So Bilal went with his brother. They asked, when they saw Bilal, they immediately realized that this man who had asked for the hand of the man's daughter, he has one of the most influential Sahaba with him coming to talk about how good a man he is. So they asked, the father asked Bilal, "Oh, I didn't know that this was your brother. I'm so sorry we treated him like that. I didn't know it was your brother." And he said, "What do you have to say about your brother?" And not having a shred of asabiyah, not having a shred of my family, even when they're wrong, Bilal ibn Rabah said that this is my brother. He is no good. I haven't found any good at him whatsoever. Now, if you want to marry your daughter to this no good brother of mine, then go ahead and do it. But just because he's my brother, just because you're just waiting for me to say that he's a fine man, that's your decision. But no, I am not pushing him forward because we are from the same place. We are from the same mother. He is no good. So do as you please. So brothers and sisters, in this context, in this city right here in Baltimore, where so many of us have been guilty when we looked at the rebellions. When we looked at the rebellions, I'm going to get off here. When we looked at the rebellions here in Baltimore, because of stereotypical information and labels that have been attached to so many, if not most, of people of African descent, we were immediately calling them thugs. We were immediately saying, "Look at those criminals." And then a little more time goes by, and we realize that in parts of Baltimore that the institutional structure has provided living places and dwellings where the income and poverty level is worse oftentimes than many third world countries. And so then we had to take a step back and realize, well, maybe these people are not just thugs and criminals. Maybe this structural racism, this system here in Baltimore has not afforded. I'm not making excuses for people to take other people's property. But I'm saying that the labeling comes from stereotypes that you and I have internalized about others. Assalamu alaikum.